This is the Authority Company podcast, conversations with leaders that are shaping our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this week we are getting into the high-stakes world of wedding planning with Sara Fay Egan, the author of The Through Line. Now, we've all heard the horror stories, seen the reality shows, and watched the viral TikToks, but what's it really like to be a wedding planner? Well, Sara Fay is going to tell us how she got into it, what's it like, and how she survived in one piece. Sara Fay, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm awesome. So I know this is going to be, you probably get this question a lot, but as a kid from Jersey, when I see this name, it kind of rankles me because I'm a Jets fan. But you have Eli Manning giving you a shout out for your book. And I know you probably get tired of asking this, but your book's not a sports book. Your book's not about, professional football or growing up a Manning. Please explain this connection between you and Eli Manning before we start our conversation officially here.
Yes. Well, my husband actually grew up with Eli in New Orleans. They were neighbors and still to this day are close friends. And I went to Ole Miss. So before I even knew my husband was cheering on Eli and the Ole Miss football team, and have remained very close. But I actually planned Eli and his wife Abby's wedding. And so the people who did testimonials, most of them were clients of mine or brides or grooms of mine. So I reached out to Eli because he did have a big curveball with his wedding, although I didn't tell them about it till years later because it was behind the scenes, which I feel like I actually ended up doing a lot with other weddings because I felt like that was my job. And years later, over wine, told him what had happened behind the scenes. So there was curveballs.
A tidbit about it for us. Could you tell what one of the curveballs was?
Sure. Well, they actually got married in Cabo, and it was the Wednesday before the wedding, and I was standing there in the ballroom, which is always hard. I ended up, a lot of my business and clients ended up being friends because the best, advertising is word of mouth always. And ended up being clients that had been bridesmaids in weddings or just word of mouth. So it's always hard though when you're friends and you're trying to juggle that and all your friends are there in the swimming pool and drinking margaritas and we're in the ballroom. But that was my job and I loved it. So it was Wednesday before the wedding and I was in the ballroom and we got a call that we were waiting on all the flowers to come and the flowers just hadn't arrived yet. And we got a call that the customs agent just decided to burn all the flowers at customs when it crossed the border into Mexico. And it's always really hard for people that are in the industry to plan weddings in other countries because you've got all of these rules. But flowers specifically in different countries, there's certain rules about which types of flowers can come in and out of the country. So you couldn't have the same flowers at your wedding in California that you could in Cabo. So we're always very careful to only have the flowers that are let into the country on the list. But this day, I don't know if the customs agent had his own daughter getting married and he took them and put them in the back of his car or what he did with them or if he saw a bug. I have no idea, which are always on flowers. But he burned them and we got the call that all the flowers were on fire. We weren't going to be getting any flowers, especially orchids, which were supposed to be hanging from the ceiling. And then about 5 minutes later, some of their family members, his mom and my mother-in-law, and they walked into the ballroom and said, "What are you doing? Where are you working? Come out and just lay at the pool with us." And I just smiled and said, "Everything's great, but I'm not going to make it to the pool today." And so always kind of had to have on that professional face and smile, even though a lot of times things were not so great behind the scenes. And I knew it was my job to make it happen. So what we did was we got a floral designer from our team and somebody else that spoke great Spanish, put him on a plane, flew him to Mexico City, rented them the largest van we could find and said, "Go grab every flower that you can find that are in the white, pink, and green color palette. I don't care what it is. And load up the truck with as many flowers as you can and drive to Cabo." And they did. And it was beautiful. And our wonderful team stayed up overnight and made it happen. And I really never told Eli and Abby about it until maybe 2 years ago. So that was about 16 years ago. So it was a big curveball, but I did write about it in the book. So
that sure was. And so I'm curious. Well, first let's talk about the burning of the flowers. Like, Is that have you? Because I'm sure you've done a lot of work in international markets. Like, is that common that they just burn flowers?
It is not common. No, it's the only thing that's ever happened. And that is, with curveballs and being able to pivot and switch gears is so important in life, but also in the wedding industry and event planning industry, because no matter how many years I was going on 20 years of wedding planning, and you think you've seen it all, and then something happens and you just are in shock because you can't imagine something else happening like that. So
Wow. Now, I'm sure you had a strong vision, especially knowing, oh my God, not only am I lifelong friends with Eli Manning, he's like a superstar, a household name. Were you able to fit the original vision with the flowers that were the pre-burnt
yes,
flowers with the
yes.
flowers you got from Mexico City?
Everything was exactly as planned. The only thing that was different is we had orchids hanging from the ceiling, and we ended up with roses, but it was just as beautiful, and they never knew. So it was great. So I feel like that's why you surround yourself with amazing vendors and hire a great wedding planner.
So let's get into this wedding planning thing, because I think for many who are like, I guess maybe men, like we only hear like the worst of it, like because we were like, hey, we don't want to get involved in that, and then so obviously bridezilla has become a thing, and it's this cliche thing that is highly demanding. So we all kind of know on the outside that this is a very difficult industry to navigate.
Right.
Why would you want to get involved in it?
Well, I'm the first to admit that I'm crazy. I'm nuts. And I loved that, I didn't do as many local weddings. Mainly the local weddings that I did were crazy jigsaw puzzles of putting tents together. And I loved the challenge, and I love to stay busy, and I love my favorite thing. One day I had this realization that I never dreamed to be a wedding planner. I looked up and thought, how did I get here? I never even dreamed about my own wedding as a child. But I really loved having a client come in and then telling me their dream and bringing that to life. And so it was a challenge, and even all different types. The biggest compliment to me always is when a guest came into the wedding or the event and said, "Oh my goodness, this is so Caroline," or whatever the client's name was, because you can relate it a lot to interior design as well, with designers, especially with wedding designers, where people walk in and they immediately can name the interior designer or the florist or who designed the wedding or home. And I never wanted people to do that. I wanted them to walk in and say, "This is so the bride and groom." So
Wow.
I always really tried to get to know them and capture their personality, whether it was my personality or not. Now, if I didn't totally agree or thought something was tacky, I would say it and try to put a beautiful spin on it. But I wanted it to be a reflection of them. And that was fun.
That's so cool. All right, so I mentioned the bridezilla thing. I've been on a track record that like the 3 or 4 last weddings that I was either invited to or friends were putting together, the wedding planner was fired. Like there was like a streak of like 3 in a row. Not the same planner, but it was like each time they had to fire the wedding planner for not getting the job done. Why is that job so hard? Because it seems like, like you mentioned, you didn't grow up dreaming about your wedding day, but a lot of women and even men think about that. And so there's all this added pressure. So tell me about this fraud, like sort of like on the edge of your seat. And you
Right.
beautifully illustrated it with Eli Manning, but like this idea of like having to manage all this pressure, and a lot of people just can't cut it.
Right. And it's honestly sad because as I saw the clients that would come in and be so stressed out and be putting so much pressure on themselves, I could tell from day one, those were the ones that weren't going to enjoy the wedding day at all. The ones that were sitting there stressing over the perfect Pantone shade of blue, and the ribbon was 1 inch off and they threw a fit or whatever it was, which are all important details. And I wanted those to be perfect. But, you could always tell when they were so stressed about that. I always gave them my speech that said, "Okay, if you're out on the dance floor, your guests are going to be out on the dance floor. And if you're having fun, they're going to have fun. And you're the host and they're going to follow your lead." Because, I've seen weddings where they spent, millions of dollars, and, it's not fun and it's sad. The bride's in the corner. And so, you really want them to Yes, all those details are so important and it is special, such a special day. But really, life goes on after it as well. And you want to have that memory and you want to have that special day. I mean, I really love destination weddings because it's really the only time that everyone you love is in one space together. And while, having a local ballroom wedding, it is, but, people come in, they leave, the older guests are at home in time to watch the 10 o'clock news. But for a destination wedding, it really turned into this 3-day weekend where your closest friends, your fiance's closest friends, your college friends, your high school friends, everybody that might not know each other is surrounded by a pool or just together, really getting to know each other and watching all that happen, I think is really special.
Cool. Well, if I may slightly push back as a Generation Xer, the
Sure.
idea of a destination wedding seems like a horrible idea. Like the fact that you're forcing, like, and again, I'm over exaggerating, but you're forcing people to literally like book travel to
Yeah.
block a number of dates. And I know this is incredibly popular, especially with younger generations. But man, I just whenever I see that come across, I think my nephew had one last year in Puerto Rico, and it's just like, "Ugh, what are you doing? I gotta fly. I gotta have a race with my dog. Like, tell me about this idea about that, because it sounds like you're a fan of them, but talk about how it affects the other people.
Well, I'm a fan of them if it makes sense. I feel like, years ago when they were new and fun and you were the only one that was having them or the only one of two in a year, it was great. But then it's just like anything in any fad and trend. When it becomes so popular, it's not fun anymore. And so, when you are asking your friends who are newly working and they're having to take off jobs and for the bachelorette party and all these things, it does become too much. So I think if you approach your wedding as thinking about your guests first and thinking about their experience, then it's the same as entertaining at home. If you're thinking about their comfort level and thinking about them, then it really all makes sense. I've had brides that called me and said, I want you to pitch, where should I get married? And I've literally pitched a wedding plan for California, Italy, and Cabo. And we had 3 different weddings. And what do you want to do? To me, it's just not as special when you're just picking a place out of the blue and you're saying, oh, I want to have a destination wedding. But when you grew up, going to Maine every summer your whole life and your family has history there and you're going to take your kids back there every summer and it's just such a special place to you and your family, that makes sense. So if it makes sense to you, I feel like you can make it work, but you still need to think about your guests and their comfort. Are there flights going in there that are affordable? Are there, and then maybe you need to make some accommodations with your wedding budget um, to help accommodate the guests. For example, if you are traveling somewhere and it's a 45-minute ride, well, maybe you do need to budget for transportation for your guests, but have fewer guests. So that way you're thinking about them first.
Okay, I love that. All right, you sold me. If the makes sense, I'm totally on board. That the main example is wonderful. It is. Could you share like the most random destination place that you've done? It sounds like you have like your benchmarks that you're like, okay, these are go to. But is there a place that you did one and you were like, oh boy, how am I going to pull this one off? Because I'm not, either used to working in this market or having to find different vendors or something like that.
Yes. Definitely. You know where it was a very, very, very hard place to plan a wedding is Marfa, Texas. It's become very popular and kind of a fad and trendy certain types. Actually, a lot of New Yorkers come down there. There's really cool art galleries and restaurants, but only for about 2 weeks out of the year when it's in season, when these New Yorkers come down and do that. So actually the first wedding that I planned there, there's a story from it in the book. And there's a really trendy hotel there and all these things, but at that time there wasn't. And we actually had to put a chuck wagon in the town square and provide breakfast and lunch for the guests because there really wasn't even a place to go. So when you're going into a place where there is zero infrastructure and you have to think about every single thing for the guest, it's really hard. And most of the locations that we ended up going to, whether it was Colorado, Maine, Cabo, we actually ended up bringing a lot of vendors still from Dallas because there just weren't any local vendors. I'm all about using local vendors first And maybe you can find, a photographer, hair and makeup, some things. But for the big infrastructure, you usually have to go to a larger city where the vendors are well versed in the subject. So,
Oh yeah, that's great. Because I was curious about that because I'm sure in a lot of these destinations, like my nephew was in San Juan, Puerto Rico, so I'm sure there's a pretty good infrastructure there for DJs, photographers. But like Martha, Texas, I'm sure,
right.
and now it probably is. Now it's a cottage industry now of everyone wanting to get married down there. And why? I don't. Just out of curiosity, why there? Is there a reason that was there like a Kardashian who did something there that all blew up? Because I remember like Kim went to Iceland, everyone went to Iceland. So I'm just curious, like why there?
No, actually, well, the first wedding that I'm talking about is actually a dear friend and a bride. She actually wrote a testimonial as well, Lizzie Duplantis. She was Lizzie Means. She founded Mirren Crosby Boots. And so it all ties back because she grew up on a ranch there, and now makes these custom boots. So it all ties in. So it was so very her. And now that the fact that she got married there, it was perfect. But if somebody just picked it because they saw it in a magazine and thought it was cool, I would urge them against it.
Yeah, you've got the experience. All right, so let's talk about the title and the concept of the through line. What do you hope readers get from that the idea of the through line? First, like break it down for us, and then how could it help people?
Sure. So the through line, actually, back to a minute ago when we were talking about the stress of weddings, it's an interesting concept that I've used almost in every bride meeting I've ever had. And you see these clients coming in their very first meeting, and they're so stressed, and they're trying to pick the perfect thing for their save the date to mail out, the perfect colors, the perfect size, the perfect monogram. And they think that the decision that they make that day is going to dictate the whole wedding and their whole life. And if they make a wrong decision, it's just horrible. And it's I try to explain to them that, they can, whatever they choose then, whether it was a monogram, we can pivot and do a different version of it later. You don't have to be so stuck on this one thing and be worried if you make a bad decision or need to pivot. And as we were going on the writing journey, and I was about halfway through the book, I still didn't have a name. And I knew I wanted it to be something about switching gears or curveballs. And I explained to my editor this process of the through line. And I just said, I am really the only person that can write this book. I've got these unique experiences that were unique to me, and they're of a myriad of different topics, whether it's wedding planning, restaurants, navigating, living in a hospital, so many different things. But I uniquely have this story that's tied together that creates my through line. And I've had to switch gears many times. I've had so many curveballs, but really through it all, I feel like I truly have found happiness, and I'm much happier now on the other side of it. So it's really something I do have to explain to people. But once I explain it, they say, "Oh, okay, that makes sense."
Awesome. And speaking of happiness, you write about in the book about joy as a guiding principle for success. And so let's talk about this intersection of joy, but also this immense pressure that's involved in the industry that you work in terms of like, yes, in theory, the wedding is the most joyous day of their person's lives, but there's also a lot of stress that goes with that. So how does joy factor in all this?
Well, I think, actually, you would say a lot of times there isn't joy underlying. I mean, you might have a client that is very stressed. You might have a mother and a daughter that are screaming at each other, because a lot of times that was the stressful situation. And I joked many times my business card needed to say therapist, not wedding planner, because I was usually the middleman talking to the bride and talking her off the ledge and then talking the mother off the ledge and trying to find some medium in between it. And really trying to bring them back to, okay, what's the reason we're all here? And that is, getting married. And but even on the back end, even our team, I mean, I think it's always so important to be playing music in the tent, and to be, if it's a late night, hour and we're still working hard, just to be, laughing and finding the levity in the situation. Because if you don't, I really think you become paralyzed and you freeze in the moment. So no matter, what the situation is, whether it's your life or that event, if I stopped in any one situation, because I had many, many crazy things happen, if I stopped and just really got caught up in what was actually happening, I probably would have frozen and laid down and crawled in a ball and cried. So I think it's important to, regroup, find joy, and just kind of surround yourself with those like-minded people. I found a lot of times if I was surrounded with people that were maybe negative or didn't have the same mindset as me, it really does wear on you and you don't realize it. But when you are surrounded with people that have that same mindset and, the glass is half full, it's a completely different day. So that's what I've tried to do from now on.
That's great. I'm trying to find a way to phrase this, but how do you not come across as condescending to a client when you're trying to talk them off the ledge? Like you're like, when they're having these like high tension moments, and if you could say like, hey, I don't know how you would handle it, but you could be like, hey, don't worry, I've done 1,000 of these, you'll be totally fine. And then for the person to be like, well, I don't care how the other 1,000 went. I know this is the one. So how do you balance that line? Because you mentioned the fact that you're kind of a therapist too, but so. Well, tell us about like what kind of tone you have to take, and I'm sure every case is different. But like, because I think most people like, you have no idea what I'm feeling, Sara Fay, but then you have some idea. So tell me about some of those like.
Yeah. I feel like people never really, I really don't think anyone ever said that to me. And I feel like, yes, you never want anybody in front of you, whether it's a client or somebody that's a friend and you're trying to give them advice. You never want them to feel one of 1,000. You want them to feel one of one. You want to look them in the eyes. You want to create that relationship with them. I talk about that a lot in the book. And you really want to put yourself in their shoes to then be able to give them advice, whether you really think what they're saying is ridiculous or not. You really want to try to meet them halfway. And I think a lot of times if, brides had some ridiculous requests, I tried to take that ridiculous request, take what I thought was the best solution and somehow make a plan in the middle to make them feel like they're getting what they wanted, but still do what I thought was best for the event, which is hard. So a lot of psychotherapy and analyzing. And, I think, I talk about this too, is chameleon sales is a real thing. And I learned that, from my first boss, Todd Fiskus, but when you're in a meeting with somebody, and we'd have so many different clients from all different walks of life, but if somebody comes in, and inherently I took this on. So if I knew I was going to a meeting in a field, I might wear my cowboy boots and, or if I was going to a meeting at a corporate boardroom, I'd probably wear a black dress and pantyhose and a sports coat. And so, just kind of dressing to their level or talking up or down to their level, whoever you're sitting across with. If somebody's got their arms crossed and all tense, you don't want to be standing up looking down to them. You really kind of want to meet the person where they are and make them feel comfortable before you try to give any advice.
Okay, you mentioned it, so now I have to ask. Ridiculous requests. Can you throw one at me, like one of the most ridiculous requests where you were like immediately like, because I know someone, Sara Fay, just talking to you for like 20-something minutes, you feel like you're one of those people who's a problem solver. You'll try to find a way. But what was that one request that came? You're like, hell no, I am not going to be able to do that.
Well, I'll tell you a ridiculous request that we did make happen.
All right.
And this is in the book too, but we had a groom that wanted to land to the ceremony out of a helicopter. And it was really funny, but they had a sense of humor and they wanted to pretend like they wanted the guests to think that the bride was left at the altar and that the groom had left her at the altar. And this was an outdoor wedding in a garden, a beautiful garden. So we found a stunt double that looked like the groom and put him in the same tuxedo as the groom and had the groom hiding behind the altar behind bushes with my assistant at the time. And the beautiful strings were playing. And then as the strings were playing and it looked like the bride had already walked down the aisle and was at the altar, we cued the Mission Impossible music, which was not my idea, but they wanted that. And it was dun 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 dun. And I cued the helicopter from my headpiece, and the helicopter came over, which, by the way, had been radioing me that it had about 5 minutes or was going to run out of gas. So we had to do it right then. And the bride wasn't there yet. So we're orchestrating all of that. And the helicopter hovered over the altar area. the rope came down, the stunt double, jumped out of the helicopter via the rope behind the same bush where the groom was. The groom popped up and dusted off the grass like he had just fallen from a helicopter and ran to the altar. So we did make that happen. I wouldn't recommend it, but we have made crazy things happen before.
I think an important thing that you've shown, either in your career, your book, and in your conversation, is just this importance of human connection and relationships. Because as a wedding planner, I'm sure you have to be the, I know a guy. Like, hey, do you know
1,000.
something? I know a guy. Tell me
Yeah.
how you cultivate those I have a guy relationships where, if someone has a request, you know exactly who to turn to.
Sure. And I think it takes years and years, to build up that Rolodex. And I think in the beginning, we'd have clients come in that would say, oh, I have a cake person, or I have a florist, or I have a valet. And in the beginning, before I knew better, we'd say, okay, we'll use your person. And then I quickly learned as time went on that you can't, finally had to put my foot down just to say, I'm so glad you have your person. And sometimes it would work if I did my research because I did want it to be a reflection of them. But most of the time when your grandmother's making the wedding cake, it is not going to arrive in one piece. So you just have to, go with the vendors that you trust, that will wake up at 2 a.m. and come save the wedding tent when it's pouring down rain, or will just have your back. So that became something that, as I went on and on in my career, became a stickler with, that those people that I had just worked with, that I trusted them and referred people to them, and they trusted me. And it was really a two-way relationship. And we were in the trenches literally together, working, and had gained mutual respect for each other. Those are the people that I wanted on every job.
That's cool. That's awesome. I think since 2020, I think a lot of companies and entrepreneurs are probably focused more on work-life balance. It's a
Mhm.
phrase you hear all the time. Some people think it's like it's impossible. I think in your line of work, how do you pull off work-life balances? Because a lot of these weddings are, like you mentioned, they could be destination weddings. They could be weeks and months of planning. It could be taking over like your entire weekend lifestyle. How were you able to pull this off with a whole bushel full of kids at home and a husband and all of that? We'll get into those guys later, but like, how did you pull that off?
Well, I really pulled it off until I didn't, honestly. And I talk about that a lot in the book, to where, I'm just wired that I want to make things happen. And if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And, then once you have a family and kids and a husband and other responsibilities, it does become hard. So I went from doing weddings every single weekend and traveling every single weekend, missed a lot of milestones in my friends' lives, missed, my best friend's wedding. So literally missed a lot of things because I had overbooked my calendar, overpromised to people, and felt like I had to execute and follow through on my commitment. And then as I went along, and when I had my daughter, who's 13 now, decided I couldn't do that. That's when I quit my job there and started my own business. And my goal was to take fewer weddings a year. And even really in the end, I ended up taking 4 weddings a year, but they were all destination. And so when you think about that, I was still gone away from my children about 8 weeks out of the year, because you'd go on site visits. And if you're flying to Italy, you're there for at least a week on a site visit, or 2 site visits, or several, and you're there the week of the wedding. So while 4 weddings doesn't sound like a lot, it really was a lot of time away from my kids. And so I loved it so much, and it was really hard for me to step away from that. But when my daughter got really sick, I just learned that I had to, and I had to put my family first. And that really made me pivot into running our family restaurant group, because I love it. It's very similar. It's hospitality, but I really have found more work-life balance now, where I can have conference calls and work more during school hours, and then try to switch gears and be a mom and drive carpool after school. So I've found it a little more now, but it's definitely hard. And you have to be pivoting and analyzing it every day. I'm constantly rearranging my schedule to remind myself when I make it too heavy on one side to switch it back to the other. So there's definitely no such thing as true balance. I think it's a pendulum, and you always have to keep in check.
Well, I'm glad you picked an industry that's much easier. I mean, I hear it's just like a cake. It must be like you're on vacation now, Sara Fay.
It's a day at the beach.
Yeah.
Well, we've already said that I'm certifiably crazy, and I love the crazy, and so that's just my personality. So I love it.
Good for you. Well, I always wrap up these conversations talking about the dedication of the book, and we talk about your family. So this book is dedicated to my loving husband, Merrick, who is my rock and my best friend, to my beautiful daughter, Grace. I cannot wait to watch you grow and flourish in life. I'm so proud of you. To my sweet son, Walker, your kindness and love for others will take you so far in life. To my mother, Joan, and my sister, Grace, who have stood by my side through it all. I love you. You are my everything. You talked about how the struggle was real to transition into becoming like fully invested into your family life because your career had taken so much of it. Why was it so important to dedicate the book to this group of people that probably had to put up with a lot of crap, Sara Fay, looking back at it, I'm sure. Take me behind the scenes with that dedication.
Yes. Well, starting with my husband, who's absolutely wonderful, and we met in college studying abroad. So he's definitely been there through it all from the beginning of all my craziness, and really put up with, so much of me being out of town every weekend, and really working so much. But I think he believed in me, and really from the beginning we became more partners, so that we kind of treated each other as equals, which I think is really important, and kind of just shared everything. So sometimes he picks up more slack, sometimes I do, and we just go back and forth. So he's definitely been my rock there. And then my daughter, Grace, when she was born, I thought I really had a struggle. I thought, I have this great career, and it's all I wanted, and I feel like I'm really good at it, but I don't know how to do that and be a mom as much as I was working and as much as I was traveling. So I quit because I didn't know how to do both. And it was really a struggle. And I feel like now it's more prevalent, especially since COVID, where there's more, moms working from home, and it's just an easier thing to do, because I knew my mother was such an incredible mother. And even though she was an interior designer, she was always home. She was always present. So she would work during the day or after she put us to bed, and she would always pick us up in carpool and cook meals. And so she was always there for me. And I knew I wanted to be that kind of mother. So, Grace, really completely changed my life. And my son Walker is so wonderful and so kind and so easy, and just a great athlete, and just wonderful. He's hilarious, and has also put up with a lot. And my mom and sister are just always there. They're really kind of my steadfast. We joke that if I call one of them, we just three-way in the other, and they literally drop everything. And when Grace was in the hospital, they literally just dropped everything and were there every day, and moved in with me and made my life run, and can't imagine life without them. So you're going to make me cry.
That's awesome. Her name is Sara Fay Egan. The book, The Through Line, Finding Happiness Through the Curveballs of Life, Family, and Business. Sara Fay, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
And that'll do it for this episode. If you'd like to find out more information about Sara Fay and the rest of our authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.